The mist from the Drakewald forest slid slowly down into the valley, where the small town of Holzmarkt lay, one of many half-forgotten settlements in the northern Reichland. Only a month ago, merchants from Altdorf had stopped here on the road to Middenheim, and the bells of the little shrine to Sigmar had rung at dawn and dusk. Now the bells were silent. From the forest, darkness was coming. A tainted blackness settled over the wood that had once fed the town and offered shelter. First the animals vanished, then the woodcutters, and then the signs appeared, enormous hoofprints, shattered branches, trees splintered as if struck by. Something stronger than any beast. Worse still were the marks cut into the bark. Cursed runes of darker powers. The sort of symbols that muddled the mind just from looking at them. The townsfolk whispered a single word, spoken like a prayer, and a warning. Beastmen. On the third night after the full moon, a horn wailed above Holzmarkt. From the darkness, a band of sinister shapes began to take form. From deep within the Drakewald came heavy footfalls, the snap of breaking limbs, a harsh, ragged breathing, until at last silhouettes emerged from the black. Horns, hooves, bone spears. Rusted axes dotted their head walked him. He was far larger than the other beastmen, almost as tall as the trolls of the World's Edge Mountains, a living knot of savage muscle and brutal strength. Thick black fur covered his back and neck, matted with dried blood and the mud of forest hollows. His shoulders were broad as an ancient oak's trunk, and with every step his heavy hooves sank into the earth. But it was his head that truly chilled the blood. From his massive skull rose a pair of huge, twisted horns, thick, jagged, carved over with foul runes. From one horn hung trophies, shriveled fingers, fragments of skull, and a small rusted seal of Sigmar, defiled and smeared with blood. His eyes burned with feral intelligence. It wasn't merely animal rage that lived there, but hatred directed at everything human, everything built, everything ordered. This was no common monster. He was a warrior chosen by the herd, a leader among beasts. Across his shoulders lay armor pieced together from plundered human plate-bent sections of imperial cuirass, a fragment of a knight of the White Wolf's helm, and on his chest the lashed-on skull of some long-dead priest. From his belt dangled bone talismans and rune-scratched fetishes. Bestowed by the shaman. In his hands, he carried a massive axe. Its edge was chipped and dark with old blood, yet remained keen as a predator's fangs. The haft was bound in hide and sinew, and with every motion small trinkets clinked, little bells made from human teeth. The Bestigor halted at the edge of the clearing. He lifted his head and drew in a deep breath through wide nostrils, tasting smoke, fear, and the scent of the people of Holtz May RKT. Then a low, guttural roar spilled from his throat, so deep and primal it seemed to belong to the Drakewald itself. Behind him, the herd answered with a chorus of furious howls. And when the Bestigor moved forward, the band surged after him like a wave of darkness, ready to drown the small town of the Empire in blood and fire. Among them walked not only the wild gore, but something worse, hunched silhouettes of mutants, men cursed by chaos, twisted and bent, bearing extra eyes, warped heads, and animal limbs. Where human ones should have been, they were driven onward by a goat-faced Bray shaman, smeared in blood and ash, whispering prayers to the dark gods. But on that night, the people of Holzmarkt were not alone. On the road leading into the town waited a rider. His mount was a powerful warhorse, heavy and muscular like the steeds of the Knights of Middenheim. The animal was clad in plate-segmented steel guarding, neck and chest, and upon its brow was etched the twin-tailed comet of Sigmar. Steam curled from the horse's nostrils in the cold night air, and each strike of hoof on hard ground sounded like distant thunder. Upon its back sat a priest. Matthias. Krieger looked nothing like the gentle clerics of the Empire's city shrines. He was a man of war, one of the priests of the Order of Sigmar, sent to the places where the Empire's rule ended and the wild frontier of chaos began. His armor was heavy and worn by battle. The steel plates of his breastplate bore many dents, from axes and spears. Broad pauldrons rested on his shoulders, worked with reliefs of hammers and comets, the holy signs of Sigmar. On his chest, he wore a medallion stamped with the twin-tailed comet, a relic said to have come from an old shrine in Altdorf. Beneath the plate, he wore mail, and around his waist a thick war belt, from which hung sealed parchments, metal talismans, and wax marks of blessing. Each was a prayer spoken before battle protection against chaos, heresy, and the curse of the dark gods. Matthias himself was a huge man. Broad-shouldered and thick-armed, he carried the weight of years of fighting in the set of his body. His hands were hard as iron from endless training with the Warhammer, and every movement held the certainty of a seasoned warrior. His face was stern and tired, cut by old scar souvenirs from clashes with Drakwald cultists and chaos-tainted raiders. A short, dark beard was threaded with gray, and beneath his helm stared cold, focused eyes. There was no fear in them. Slowly, the priest raised his weapon, a heavy warhammer whose head was engraved with runes of faith and the old marks of the Young, forges of Gnome. It looked less like a soldier's tool than a weapon built to break gates and skulls alike. In an ordinary man's hands, it would have been impossible to wield, but Matthias held it with calm certainty, as if it were simply an extension of his arm. In the saddle, his silhouette was like a bronze statue still, powerful, unyielding. He did not look like a man who had come to die. He looked like a man who had come to stop chaos. He watched the beasts spilling from the tree line. Sigmar, grant me strength. The Bestigor roared a low, throat-tearing bellow that split the night. Like a cracking tree. And then he charged. But he was not the first. Brother Matthias Krieger spurred his mount, driving his heels into its flanks. The armored horse surged forward like a battering ram, heavy hooves tearing at the road that led to Holzmarkt. The first, Gore burst from the brush with a hooked axe. The priest's hammer fell before the beast could complete its swing. The blow was like thunder over the World's Edge Mountains. Skull cracked with a dull snap, and the Beastman collapsed like a sack of meat. Second lunged with a spear. Matthias caught the shaft in one hand, ripped it from the creature's hooves, and hauled it close. The Beastman didn't even have time to howl. His hammer drove into its chest, breaking ribs and crushing the heart beneath. A third Gore leapt for the horse, trying to sink a knife into the animal's neck. Matthias turned his hammer in his grip. Metalhead caved the creature's skull in with a short, brutal motion. Blood and black fur spattered across the priest's steel plates. For Sigmar, for the Empire, the Gore came at him in waves. Axes hissed through the air. Spears rang against armor. But Matthias was a living bulwark. His hammer moved in wide, annihilating arcs. One blow, a snapped neck. A second, a shattered jaw. A third, skull collapsing in on itself like a cracked jug. Each strike was a sentence passed. The Beastmen began to falter, to retreat, to circle with rage and fear, mixing in their howls. Then the ground trembled. From the darkness stepped the Bestigor, advanced with a heavy, measured stride, shoving lesser beasts aside like a wolf pushing through yapping dogs. His massive horns gleamed in the thin moonlight, and the axe in his hands was almost as large as Matthias' hammer. The Bestigor bellowed and hurled himself forward. The collision was savage. The axe fell like lightning. Matthias raised his hammer, and metal screamed against metal with a shock that rang through the clearing. The force nearly tore him from the saddle. His horse screamed and staggered back a step, hooves gouging the earth. The Bestigor struck again. Matthias slid from the saddle as the blade swept over his head, cutting the air with a hungry hiss. The priest's hammer slammed into the beast's side. The Bestigor rocked, but did not fall. He was powerful, stronger than the common herd. His muscles were like steel cables, his body hardened by countless bloody hunts and raids. The monster attacked with renewed fury. The axe carved the air, forcing Matthias to give ground. The blade smashed into stone, sending chips flying. Matthias answered with a blow to the ribs. The Bestigor howled, but instead of retreating, he surged forward and drove his shoulder into the priest. The impact hit like a charging minotaur at a herdstone. Matthias skidded across the ground. The Bestigor lifted his axe for the killing stroke. Then Matthias whispered a prayer, quiet, short, an old invocation taught only within the sacred walls of the great temple of Sigmar in Altdorf. Sigmar Heldenhammer, guide my hand. The runes on the hammerhead flared with pale gold light. The priest rose. The Bestigor swung. Matthias struck first. The hammer crashed into the creature's knee with the sound of splintering wood. Bone broke. The Bestigor lurched, screaming in pain. The second blow followed immediately straight. Between the horns, the skull burst beneath the force of the blessed strike. The Bestigor crashed to the ground, heavy as a felled tree. For a moment, there was silence. Then an unnatural chant drifted from the forest. Bray shaman. That hunched figure stepped from between the trees, raising a bone staff. Runes of chaos crawled across its skin, and from its throat poured a foul incantation. Calling upon the powers of Tzeentch, the air began to tremble. The ground blackened beneath its feet. The mutants howled in rapture. Matthias ran. The shaman lifted its hands, and in the air, a twisted violet energy began to form. Chaos made visible. Priest whispered another prayer. Sigmar cleansed this ground. The hammer blazed like a small sun. Matthias leapt and struck. There was no blood, no crack of bone. Only light. Holy power detonated at the point of impact. The Bray shaman ignited like a torch, its corrupted sorcery tearing apart in the air. It screamed as its body crumbled into ash and slag. The rest of the Beastmen hesitated, and then they fled, scattered and wailing. They vanished back into the black tangle of the Drak wall. Dawn rose over Holzmarkt. The townsfolk began to emerge from their homes. Among broken bodies and churned earth, they saw a lone priest standing on the road. Matthias rested his hammer on. The ground. His armor was slick with blood, and his breath came heavy after the fight. Chaos will return, he said quietly. He looked toward the dark line of the forest. It always does. Then he raised his eyes to the rising sun. But so does Sigmar.